We'll have Socrat and NDP nomination results following the National.
The CTV National News with Sandie Rinaldo.
Good evening. The Soviet Union is stepping up pressure on Washington, trying to convince the United States to stop testing nuclear weapons. Moscow declared its own ban on nuclear tests over a year ago. And this weekend, a Soviet general made a public appeal to the U.S. as he showed Western reporters around a top-secret military zone. Jack Redden reports.
Latest move was to arrange an unprecedented visit to the Soviet nuclear test site near Semipalatinsk by a group of foreign correspondents. They were flown by special flights to the desolate Rocky Hills in a remote Asian part of the country that has never been opened before. The Western reporters were escorted by their Soviet military hosts into the mouths of tunnels drilled into the arid land for testing nuclear weapons. Tracks run deep into the earth to the sites where more Soviet bombs will be exploded if the Kremlin does not get Washington to join in a halt in testing. Soviet military spokesmen assembled for the visit made no secret of the reason the reporters were flown in from Moscow. They want more publicity about their 14-month-old nuclear test moratorium in hopes of forcing Washington to join. A Soviet general escorting the reporters made a plea for disarmament.
We want to approach this with an open spirit, and we ask you, let's disarm, let's stop the tests, and let's accomplish the task of strengthening peace.
Soviet officials are convinced that Washington is using its current round of tests for research on the Star Wars project, and stopping that remains Moscow's #1 priority. For CTV News, this is Jack Redden in Moscow.
Top Soviet and American officials held a surprise meeting tonight on another issue. U.S. Secretary of State George Shultz and Soviet Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze went into their fourth meeting in a week. They are trying to resolve a dispute over Nicholas Danilov, the American reporter accused of spying in Moscow. Shultz went to the Soviet mission at the United Nations for the talks, and both sides are hinting that a settlement is closer than ever. They want to reach an agreement before Shevardnadze leaves for Ottawa on Tuesday. The U.S. maintains Danilov was arrested on trumped-up charges, and the dispute has complicated plans for a superpower summit. Freed Soviet dissident Anatoly Sharansky said today that if Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev attends a summit in the United States, he will face large protests. Sharansky called on Jews around the world to join him in demonstrating against the Soviet Union's restrictive emigration policies. Sharansky was in Amsterdam pleading the cause of thousands of Soviet Jews. He telephoned his message to Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto, where demonstrations were already underway. In Montreal, the protesters marched to the Soviet consulate. They carried banners urging the Soviet government to allow more Jews to emigrate to Israel. In Toronto, demonstrators wore the names of imprisoned dissidents on their shirts. They heard speakers talk of anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union and the continued denial of basic human rights. More than 5,000 government employees in Newfoundland will head back to work tomorrow. That means an end to their illegal strike, at least for now. There is no settlement yet, but the union and the provincial government have agreed to go back to the bargaining table. As Paul Harpel reports, the breakthrough follows the appointment of a mediating committee.
Back to work in the morning.
Union officials were on the phone today, telling public servants across the province to show up for work tomorrow. Union President Fraser March says all will return, but some reluctantly.
They're very apprehensive. They're not sure it can work. They were smitten with the back-to-work agreement last spring, but they accept that we must try every avenue.
The illegal strike by government workers has lasted a total of about 8 weeks. Picket lines were set up last March, and again this month. Both times there were confrontations between strikers and police. The end of the strike has been brought about by the leaders of the 4 major churches in the province. They propose the establishment of a committee that will monitor a new set of negotiations. The church leaders say they intervened because the dispute was pitting fellow workers against each other.
We've heard of just one little incident on the picket line where allegedly a husband was about to go to the picket line when a wife on the picket line took off her ring and says, "You're going through, take this with you." I mean, this is frightening.
The main issue in the dispute is money. The union wants wage parity with other government employees in the health services sector. The committee appointed this weekend has no formal powers. However, its chairman hopes the group can keep the two sides together until an agreement can be reached.
And any independent body that has really no axe to grind with government, no axe to grind certainly with the union, can make some type of a difference.
Paul Harpel, CTV News, St. John's.
The Canadian Press News Agency says that Via Rail is in a severe financial crisis. The news agency, quoting unnamed sources, says the passenger rail company can't pay some of its bills and may be on the verge of collapse. The federal government is already giving Via $500 million to operate this